Hey, thanks for checking out Nuts and Bolts with Tone. Welcome to my channel. Today we have a 2016 Ford Explorer with a 3.5 non-turbo engine. Now this one has an internal water pump, meaning it's inside the timing cover. It's a very common failure. It leaks out through the block. I'll show you where it'll come down so you know how to identify it. I'm gonna show you how to replace this water pump. It's not super difficult, just requires a couple special tools and obviously the procedure on how to do it. So if you don't do it right, you will damage the engine. So let's get into it. So on these 3.5s, how do you know that your water pump is leaking? Well, you'll have coolant leaking right down through here. It'll leak down the oil pan this way. And there is a weep hole in the block up there. I'm not taking the alternator out, so I can't really show you, but there is a weep hole right up through there. So in the picture on the right, that shows the weep hole. And if coolant is coming out of that hole, replace your water pump. That is manufactured through the block. So when the water pump fails, the coolant runs out the block. It comes out externally here to show you that there's a leak. Reason it does that is because the water pump itself is inside of the timing cover. So if the water pump fails and the weep hole, and there was no weep hole, the coolant would just go into the oil. So this way you at least can catch it before it completely fails and dumps in the crankcase. And then your timing is messed up, and then you need an engine. To replace this water pump, we need to remove the timing cover. And to remove the timing cover, we need to lock the cams in place. The cams are under the valve covers. To remove the valve covers, we need to remove the intake plenum. So we're gonna go ahead and get the plenum off, and then I'll show you what we're gonna do for the valve covers. But we need to remove, first step is gonna be remove the intake air tube, plenum, and valve covers. I'm disconnecting the AC so I can get these lines out of the way. So I can unbolt it here, and I'm gonna unbolt it down there to get this out of the way of the alternator and the timing cover so I'm not fighting it. So plenum's pretty simple. You're just gonna have a few bolts right here across the middle. This goes in between the plenum and the throttle body. You got two connectors here. They're gonna come off, they're just gonna stay there. You got a connector back here. You got to pop a clip, get that out, and there's one bracket right there with an 8mm. Take those out, plenum comes right off. You leave the throttle body connected. Go ahead and plug up your intake holes here and take an air nozzle, blow all this off the best you can. From here, you're going to be disconnecting all your coils, popping your coils out. If you turn your coils all the way that way, they'll hit right here and they'll pop up. You got to disconnect all this. We got a ground here. And we got a harness over here we got to disconnect. So we got to get that out of the way. You got your fuel line right there. Get your fuel line out of the way. And it's going to be a bunch of connectors. And then these valve covers are going to be a pain to get off because they're plastic. So you got a lot of clips that are holding them in place. Usually these things don't last super long. So hopefully your clips are still good. So I'm going to finish getting all of this off. You got a connector here, and here's the connector I was thinking of right here. It comes from the valley, plugs in right there. Got to disconnect that. So you're going to need a cam holding tool like this. This is from Lyle. This will lock the cams in place and keep them there so the engine timing does not move, and they look like this. So before you put the cam holding tools in, you got to take off these oil supply tubes that feed the variable valve timing. Don't forget to put these back on. I put them in the valve cover because the last one I did, I almost forgot to put them back in the engine. So you see these oil supply tubes, they're different, so you can't mix them up. The bigger one is for the front head. Now the cam holding tools are gonna slip on right there at the front of the cams, and both of them should fit on, each tool should fit on each head. If they don't slide on both cams, then your timing is incorrect. So you can see right here, the tool fits all the way on. And the edges of the tool should sit all the way down on the cylinder head where the valve cover rides. If they don't sit all the way down, then something isn't right with your timing. Now both sides should fit the exact same way. You see how I'm touching it to the head? It should touch like that, indicating that it's all the way down, and that locks both of the cams in place. Now the crank is at 18mm. Before you lock your cams in, you need to turn your cams over until that dot is aimed up. Both cams have that dot right there. If that's not aimed up, then your engine is 180 off. Turn your timing until the dots are at the top and then lock your cams in place. So you'll be able to see on the back one, the tool doesn't drop all the way down. You're going to see a little bit of a gap right there between the tool and the cylinder head. So that's what I was talking about. It needs to touch the cylinder head. That means that the tool hasn't dropped all the way down and the cams aren't completely lined up. So you're going to see it's going to drop. It just dropped right there. All I did was turn the crank just a little bit. I mean, a tiny bit. I just tapped it. And then the tool fell in place. And now you can see both sides of each tool is touching the cylinder head. When I first set the tools up, the dots weren't at the top. The engine was 180 off. And then when I looked at the timing, saw the dots weren't at the top, rolled it until they were at the top. Okay, so that dot is on the intake cam only. The exhaust cam is only connected to the intake cam by a separate timing chain. So that's the intake cam. So before you can get the motor mount out, you got to take the degas bottle out. You got a hose right here with a quick connect that's going to go here. So what I like to do is I take the quick connect clip off of the, after I release it and pull the hose off, I take the quick connect off of the hard line and I actually put it in the hose. One, it keeps the O-ring and all the internals in place, and two, when it clicks in, you know that the bottle is in, the line's in, and it's connected. So to take the balancer off, I just use a Chrysler balancer remover tool right here like this. I got it set up. Let me see if I can do this one-handed. So my tool is it takes a 24 millimeter. Oops. There you go, and it's off. Looks like this. It's got jaws like this. The centering bolt has a hole in it, and you have different length rods. Use the shortest rod, and it came right out. The last step before we mess with the tensioner, before the timing cover, is we have to take the tensioner off and then remove the two mounting fasteners to the alternator, and then we're just going to roll the alternator out of the way. We're not going to disconnect it. We're just going to leave it in there. And then I support the oil pan with a jack or a jack stand. And then from there, you got to take the engine mount out. Let me show you. So this is what the bolts look like for the timing cover. We got to take all those out. So this is why I went ahead and locked the cams in earlier, just so I don't forget. You don't want to mess up and forget. So that is the bolts right there. So from under the vehicle, you'll see we have engine mount we have several big 15 millimeter bolts. There's one there, and there's one there, and another one right in there. So we gotta get this tensioner off and get the generator off, and then what I do is I take out as many bolts in this the timing cover as I can from down here. Once I've dropped it down, I don't want to have to climb under the vehicle and take out many bolts. The main ones are you don't touch those 15s until the engine is sitting on a jack stand or a jack, and you have the jack and you have the engine mount out. Let's go ahead and get this tensioner off and the alternator. So before you mess with the alternator, go ahead and take the AC line off down there from the compressor. You can get to it right down through here with a long extension, and you can reach your hand down there. Get the line out of the way. I said before that you could probably leave it in. I know of people that have done it with it in, but it's easier just to take it out. Next up, we got to remove this fuel line right here. It's going to be an 8 milli right here. And you're going to use a Lyle Tools fuel line disconnect right here. Pop this line off and cap this. And then your alternator is going to just maneuver out of the way. You can't maneuver the alternator out of the way with the AC line in there. I'm sure you can, but it wasn't worth fighting it. So I went ahead and just took the AC line out. Oh, don't forget to disconnect your battery. That was the obvious before you go moving your alternator. Always disconnect your battery before you move your alternator. All right, so with it in the air right here, what you're gonna wanna do is take out all the perimeter bolts from underneath all the way up there, all the way around, If you have 16 bolts, you got them all. Now we only have the 3 engine mount bolts and the bolts up top. I'll show you those. So now that we have all of this off, I'm gonna drop it down, support it right here with a block of wood and either a jack or a jack stand, however you wanna do it. I like to use a jack stand. So once you've got the engine supported on the jack stand, whatever, you're gonna go ahead and zap this engine mount out right here. Just set that right there for a second. We have 6 more 13mm bolts right here, and then we have the 3 15s that go through here. Now you're probably gonna have to move the engine up and down, or move the car up and down, engine, however you wanna do it, to get the bolts out of the cover, because they're gonna be long, and then we're gonna pop this cover off. You're gonna have to come over to your cart right here, and I go over to my Carbine Tools e-torque section here. I got the E8. You're gonna need to remove this stud right here and this stud right here to get these bolts out, because the bolts hit it. You don't need to take out the outside ones, just these 2 here. And then you can get these bolts out. The 6 bolts at the top of the timing cover, they're longer. Then you're gonna have your 3 15s. They're gonna be different lengths. These 2 come out the way the engine sits to get the mount out. But this last bolt doesn't come out, it hits. So what we have to do is either drop the car down or raise the engine up so we can have clearance to get that bolt out right there. I almost forgot about this. There's an 8mm bolt at the back of the timing cover. Don't forget to take that out. So remember, when you pull your timing cover out, you have to be able to put it back in. It's gonna have silicone all around the edges. So remember, keep the engine how you had it, and even maybe dry fit your timing cover before you actually try to put it in, because you don't want to bump that silicone and have to do this again. So the next thing that you're going to do is, now that we've got the cover off, you want to come right here. What I do is I just go where this dot is, and I mark the camshaft sprocket, and I mark the chain. Do the same thing here, and I do the same thing on the crank. Your colored links are not going to line up. You only have to do the intake cams, because that's the only one that the chain hooks to. The two cams are held on, are hooked together by a secondary chain. We're not going to be touching that. So here's what it's going to look like before you take this apart. You're going to mark it like that. Make sure it's very distinct how you mark it. Remember, these timing chains have oil, and so sometimes oil drips down. So here's what we're after right there, that water pump right there. Yeah, it's timing chain driven inside the timing cover. So you're gonna do the same thing on the crank. What I do when the dot is in the middle, I mark both the links on both sides like that. So the first step is going to be, going to take off the intake cam solenoid on both sides. It's going to be an 8mm. You're going to take these off, pop them out. Then you're going to unbolt this timing chain tensioner right here, and it's going to be, I think, 2/8. We're going to slide this guide out. It's on a pivot right here, and it sits on the tensioner. So you're going to slide this guide out, and then we're going to unbolt this guide right here. So tensioner first, slip the slipper out. You call this one the slipper, and then remove the fixed guide. Well, camshaft solenoids first. Now I don't take the phasers out, and you can't get the chain out with the phasers on. So what you do is, after you have all this off, you slip it off the crank. You just feed the chain this way, and you're able to get it off of the water pump, okay? And then you're just gonna take this, bring it up like that. All right, we're gonna take out this guide in the front here, and now this guide, the bolt is back here up under, if I can let you see it here. The bolt is way up under there. So I use a wrench, I loosen this bolt up until I can slide this guide out almost up against the sprocket, and then this guide will rotate around like this and allow us, see right here, it's too close to the water pump, you can't get the water pump out. That's why this has to come off. To get this out, technically you have to take this phaser out. I don't do that. Now what I do is I come from underneath here with a combination wrench with a box end, and I break it loose. And now with a little ignition wrench like this, you can put it in here and just turn and get this bolt to loosen up. Now, I think that might be enough. We're almost up against the sprocket there. So now I'm going to pop these 8mm bolts off this water pump. So it should be 8 bolts, and I leave the top bolt partially in. So I'm going to try to do this one-handed. There's a little spot right there to stick a screwdriver in. So you stick the screwdriver in and you break it loose. I'm trying to hold the camera, hold the screwdriver, break it loose. It's not going to work, but you just want to make sure you have all your bolts out and just go around, break it loose, and then make sure that guide is all the way up against the phaser. Just to show you, you can take this water pump out without taking the guide out. You can see I have the guide up against the sprocket, and I'm going to rotate the water pump out with the guide in place. Next step is to clean all the silicone off and clean the water pump surface. I like to use a little razor blade scraper like this. It's from Matco. It's pretty cheap. And then you're going to get little squares of Scotch-Brite pad. Just keep it soaked in brake clean, and as long as it's soaked in brake clean, it'll clean great. So this is what the weep hole would look like if you had an external water pump. It would come out to like a little plug, and when coolant came out, you know that it had failed. Well, since this one's inside the timing cover, there is your weep hole. So when your water pump fails, it pushes coolant out of that hole, which then pushes coolant out of that hole right there in between those 2 bolt holes. It pushes it out of there, and then it comes out of the block. And that's how you know it failed. And like I said before, this is how internal water pumps are if you have one inside of your timing cover. So once you get everything cleaned up, I take the bottom of the chain and I wrap it up here along the top just to get it out of the way. So you're going to put your water pump on and you're going to torque it to 89 inch-pounds plus 45 degrees. So here's what we'll be putting in, a Ford Motor Company water pump. If you're putting in a Ford one, it will already have the gasket pressed in place. So while you're waiting, go ahead and get your timing cover clean so it has time to sit. I just got to spray it off, got everything clean. Got the new crank seal installed here. Don't forget to clean your bolt surfaces there. Right there. 15, 15. 15, that's where the 8 goes. So, front's as clean as I could get it. New crank seal, get that in now. Get this all sprayed off. So from here, we're gonna go ahead and lay the chain back down, put it kind of underneath the pipe, get it all back strung. Then we're gonna reconnect this guide. Then we're gonna put the guide on the other side. Gonna get both of those guides in. You're going to go ahead and get all your timing marks lined up. Get that one set right there, get that one set right there, and get it lined up on the crank. Once all of your marks are in place and the chain is strung, we're going to go ahead and bolt up the fixed guide on the front. So now with your timing marks all lined up and your cams locked in, your timing chain and your cams should not move. Once you have all that done, you're going to slide the slipper in. Once you've got the front guide bolted in and your slipper slipped on and your timing is all correct, we need to bolt the tensioner in. But before we bolt the tensioner in, you have to depress it and get it locked in place if you're not replacing it. Now, before you run your chain, what I like to do is I like to clean all of the sealing surfaces for the timing cover while the chain is out of the way so I have more room. So when you go to clean this, you're going to have 2 areas on this back. Right there is going to be a little puddle of oil. You want to go ahead and just sop that up so it doesn't keep just running out. And then there's the section that's right above it that is below the exhaust cam sprocket. So you want to clean that out. That's just going to keep running down the timing cover. Now, I like to stick a rag up in there until I'm ready to put the timing cover in so it soaks up all the oil. And then this section right here by the head gasket, that's just going to keep leaking out oil and it's just going to cause problems. Now, whenever you get ready to run your silicone, there's a seam at the head gasket to block, and then there's a seam where the oil pan meets the block. And you want to put a dab of silicone on each 4 of those points
before you put the timing cover on.
So I had this happen to me, and I had someone ask me this that was doing this job. What happened is they had this timing mark lined up, and this timing mark was like halfway to the tooth, and they didn't know what to do because the cams were locked in. So everything should be like it is. Well, so the cams are locked in, but there is a slight amount of movement. So what I did was this one here, the mark was here on my chain. So all I did was I took a wrench right here and I moved this cam that way while pushing down on the chain, and then the chain dropped in place. Now, you're gonna notice that down below, you can see that that mark is not gonna line up down there. Remember, we have to put this guide in here, and then our marks will line up down below. So now that I've got the chain on the top, and it's on the sprocket, it's below the sprocket, now we need to put this guide in. Actually, put this guide in first. Don't forget this guide.
So as you can see right here, the crank is off slightly. It's turned clockwise just a little bit. So what we're gonna do is I'm just gonna grab the crank and turn it back until the teeth line up with the mark. Because we're like a half a tooth off right now, so just moving the crank will line up the chain. The top chains are lined up with the mark, so now we have to get this lined up so we can get the tensioner in. This fixed guide right here is 89 inch-pounds. So all I did was grab the crank with some pliers and turned it back just a tiny bit, and the chain dropped right onto the sprocket. So we got to put the slipper in here. I'm going to try to do this one-handed. It's going to be pretty hard because the chain has to lift up and go on top of the slipper. But I'm going to try. There it is. It just slipped in one-handed. And the slipper just pushes forward. The tensioner is behind it, keeping all the slack out of the timing chain. And now we're going to look from underneath. We're going to push the slipper up like the tensioner. Look at that. Timing is dead on. So the way that you get this tensioner ready, the long shaft at the bottom is the actual tensioner. The top plastic piece keeps the tensioner pushed in so you can install it. So you can see the teeth in the top of that plastic rod. Those teeth push up against something inside of the tensioner, which keeps it locked in place. Once you get it all the way depressed, you push the pin in. This is just a timing belt tensioner pin because I don't have one for this specific one. So all you're going to do is you're going to depress the vise and then pop the little piece inside and allow that plastic mechanism to keep going up and up and up. You can see it right there. Once you have it all the way in, the pin should go in that back hole, and then you should be able to take it out of the vise, and now it's ready to install in the engine.
Gonna sit right inside the slipper. All right, so this tensioner is 89 inch-pounds as well. We're gonna torque that, and all right, so the tensioner's torqued.
Just like any timing system, before you pull the pin on the tensioner, you want to double check your timing one last time. So that one right there, dead on. We're going to go to the front, dead on. Now the bottom, you got to be careful because there's also slack in the chain until the tensioner is pulled. So right there, you can see the dot is in the middle of the two links I marked. And now you want to just keep the slack up on the chain while we pull the pin on the tensioner. And then timing is locked in place now. So if you want to be certain, you can do it this way. There are 48 links in between the right hand intake VVT assembly mark or link and the left hand colored link. The ones we marked would be the same thing. And then there's 35 links between the left hand intake assembly colored link to the two crankshaft sprocket colored links. And you can see that in the picture. There's the two colored links at the top and the two that we made at the bottom. Now I'm just going to go through this. The VVT solenoids are 71 inch-pounds plus 20 degrees. That's for both intake cam solenoids on both front and rear. Then you're going to remove the special tools. You're going to install the rails, and they are 71 inch-pounds plus 45 degrees on both of them. That's the oil supply tubes inside the valve cover. Once you've got all that torqued, we're ready to start reassembling the engine. So once you've got all that, now we're ready to put silicone on the timing cover. Now, that's right there. You can pause it and you can really look. You're going to go around the inside of the timing cover on the inside of all the bolt holes, all the way around the perimeter. And you can see those circles are where they're showing you to add the globs of silicone for the seams in the block and the head gasket. And then you want to make sure that you do the inside bolt holes for the 8mm and the 15mm. Now here's the torque specs written out easily. The 13mm bolts you're going to torque to 89 inch-pounds. Then you're going to torque the 15mm bolts to 133 inch-pounds. The 8mm bolt, you're going to torque it to 89 inch-pounds and then loosen it one turn. Then you're going to do the 15mm bolts to 22 foot-pounds plus 90 degrees. The 13mm bolts to 177 inch-pounds or 14.75 foot-pounds, and then 45 degrees. And then the last torque is going to be the 8mm bolt back to 89 inch-pounds, and then you're going to do 45 degrees. That's supposed to be an inch-pound symbol. And then 45 degrees, and the timing cover is torqued. Now the rest of the torque specs. Where your timing cover and your cylinder head meet, right there and on the other side. You're going to have 2 per valve cover. You're going to put a dab of silicone. Then the valve covers are going to be 89 inch-pounds. Your intake is going to be 89 inch-pounds, and then you're going to torque bolt 1 and 3 through 7 to 45 degrees. And then you're going to torque bolt 2 to 90 degrees. These are all 89 inch-pounds, and then the degrees is different. So you're going to torque all of them to 45 degrees except for number 2, and then 90 degrees for number 2. Number 2 is going to be the long bolt. Once you got that, then your plenum is torqued. Good to go.
So the 2 parts right below the exhaust cam sprocket on the front and the rear, the way that the engine's designed is oil just pools up there and it just slowly trickles down. So what I do is I put rags in there, I stuff rags in there, I wipe down the phasers, I get everything on the front all clean and dry, no oil. Then I get my timing cover ready. I put my dabs of silicone on the seams where the head meets the block and the upper oil pan meets the block. Then I put the rags out, and then I'll slide the timing cover in and stab it. Now, the most nerve-wracking part of any time you do a timing cover is getting it back in without touching anything and it's sealing. So you're going to lay your valve cover like this and use a tool like this and just kind of go around and knock all the seals out. And they're going to go in from the inside. I found the best way to put these seals in is a seal driver like this and lube up the seals. Lube them up real good with Seal Glide, because remember, you're hammering them into a plastic valve cover. And what I like to do is, for these gaskets like this, I like to get it all started, and I take a small little rubber hammer like this and I just tap the gasket all the way around so it doesn't fall out when I'm putting it in. So the best thing to do right here, once your timing cover has seated and your silicone is dried, if you take a razor knife, a razor blade, and just cut along here, it'll cut it nice and smooth. And this is where you're going to put silicone, here and here. And just lube up your seals for your solenoids and for your spark plug tubes, and it'll go on easier. So once you get your valve cover, you want to make sure that you tighten it like this, because you don't want it to pull down one side and not the other and crack the valve cover, install it wrong. You got these, goes around here, you got seals here, you got two spark plug tube seals. So 89 inch-pounds, don't forget the valve cover. And then I would probably go ahead and get your alternator back in place before you start messing with the wiring, because the wiring is going to be tight once you put this all in place, and your alternator is going to have a hard time getting in place. So when you put your degas bottle in, lube up your nipple there where this slides onto so the seal doesn't tear. You can go ahead and get all this in, and then once we get this in, we're going to slip the AC line around there, but get new seals for your AC line. I also recommend that you replace your Schrader valves while you're at it. Get your gasket ready here. I'm going to go ahead and put this in, but don't forget that it has to go between, this has to go between the throttle body and the intake. So it kind of finagles in there so it doesn't just set right in. Once you get that in, go ahead and we're going to run the coolant hose over. Got the AC line connected. Then once we get the intake on, don't forget your purge line. It goes from there up to the intake. I'm going to lift it up, put the drive belt on, clean it off, drain the oil one more time. That way any coolant that got in there, you drain out. Fresh oil, fresh coolant, should be good to go. Thanks for watching the video. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell, you get notified of all my future content, which you definitely don't want to miss. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.